Welcome to Q&Art, live, all about brushes. We're just going to take a couple minutes for everybody to settle in, find their places. So introduce yourselves. Come on. I want to know who you are, where you're from, what your favorite brush is. Tell us all about yourself. Introduce yourself to the people around you. Julianne and Jesus and Morgan and Faith and Carol and all of you. Say hi. Great. Faith from Reno and Kay. And okay, now we're going. Now the machine is turning. I thought, boy, you were probably wondering what we were up to, sitting here silently staring at this. Well, I'm just going to take, as I said, a couple minutes. So come right in. Elizabeth Lopez is driving. Well, I guess you can listen, but don't drive and learn about brushes at the same time. Could be a brush with disaster. All right. Linda likes a dagger brush. Ooh, I like that. Excellent. Audrey wants brushes that make her a good painter. Fair enough. We're going to tell you a bit about that. Good. Well, I hope you have some questions about brushes. We're going to try and inspire some in you, but we are going to be spending the next 90 minutes talking about brushes. Now, you may be saying to yourself, do I really want to hear about brushes for 90 minutes? I can guarantee you that in 89 minutes from now, you will be saying, running out of time, I still had so much more I want to learn about brushes. So don't worry about it. We will pack the time with exciting information and start thinking about your questions. What are you going to be asking? Now, I also wanted to let you know that I want you to pay attention. As you know, this event is brought to you by Sketchbook School and by Winsor Newton. And because it's a school, we're going to have a quiz at the end. We don't normally have quizzes at Sketchbook School, but in this case, we're making an exception. And at the end, I'm going to give you a bunch of questions pertaining to some of the information that we're going to be covering during this webinar. And then we're going to ask you to send in your answers. And we're going to take all of the people who got all the answers right, and I know that's going to include you. And we're going to pick the first 25 people, or not the first, we're going to randomly pick 25 people who got everything right, and we are going to be giving them some amazing Winsor Newton brushes. So stay tuned for that. So, all right, well, that's good. That's a reason to be here, to get a free brush, as well as scads of free information. And as I said, yes, we're sponsored by Winsor & Newton, which makes many wonderful brushes, including this, my favorite, number 7, series 7. But we're going to be talking to several people who are experts about brushes. And I'm not. I'm just a guy with a webinar. But I do have other guys and women who are going to be answering some really good questions about it. So first, let me bring on my friend David Pyle he's going to be our first know-it-all, brush know-it-all. Howdy, David.
Hey, Danny. I've put, I don't have my thinking cap. I may need to grab that at some point, but
I should hope so. Yeah. So
Yeah.
David, where are you?
So I'm just south of Fort Collins, Colorado, in my studio. I'm surrounded by a host of different kinds of art materials, including my collection of brushes, primarily watercolor brushes that I've collected over the last 40 years. Yeah.
Excellent. Good. So David is part of Sketchbook School, among other things that he does, and he is our resident art geek. He knows an enormous amount about art materials in particular, going all the way down to their chemical bonds and the like. And I'm sure he'll be bringing that up. He can't help himself, but get to this submolecular level. But he is also has had a lot of experience in the world of art supplies and art information. He has been the publisher of several major magazines, including, what are some of the names of the magazines that you've been involved with?
So I was the publisher for the Artist magazine, American Artist magazine, Watercolor Artist, Pastel Journal, and drawing, and then just a host of others as well.
Yes. So you know about art from the business side of it, with the world of art supplies. You know about it as an expert and an analyst of art materials, and you also know about it as a watercolorist, because you're an incredible watercolorist and have been painting for a long time. So
thank you. Yep.
So you're a triple threat in that regard. I also want to bring on Marla Morrison, who is
Hey.
Hi, Marla.
Hey,
so Marla is also an expert, because you're a professional watercolorist as well. So you're an expert certainly in your knowledge of using brushes, among other things, right?
I'm gonna scale back that title of expert a little bit, but I'm definitely someone who loves materials like David, and I do always like to learn more about anything I use. So I love acrylics, and I love watercolor, and so I use whatever brushes and tools I have handy for that, and I've learned a lot about all the different types. So happy to share what experience I have.
All right. So you guys, what is your favorite brush, David?
Oh, seriously? Okay, so I gotta
just pick, and you can only pick one.
I know. Well, that's okay. I'm gonna pick this one. This is my Winsor Newton Series 7 size 12 that I purchased when I was running an art material store in the late 1980s. This is a brush that was one of only 200 made. Wow. The brush makers at Winsor Newton found a batch in Russia that was the best batch of Kolinsky hair that they'd ever seen, is the word. And they purchased enough to make 200 brushes in size 12, put them on an ebony handle with a sterling silver ferrule. And I can't adequately express how much I love this brush that I've cherished since 1988. That's how many years? That's a few, isn't it? Yeah.
How was that?
What about you, Marla?
Well, that brush is sounding really good to me right about now. So that might be mine, but no. Oh, goodness. I love all different kinds of brushes, really. It's hard for me to pick, but if I had to pick one, I think for watercolor, I really like the Winsor Artist Watercolor Sable. I tend to work, even if I'm working, this is size 8 round, and even if I'm working small, I like this brush because it helps me from getting too fussy. And if I'm working a little larger, like 11 by 14, it's perfect for that too. So, nothing fancy. It's just a really well-made brush. So that's what I like to use.
It's very nice. David has revealed that he spent $450 on that magic brush. Wow. But amortized over the years, it's nothing. It's like the equivalent of a cup of coffee every month or something. So
it works fabulously. It's breathtaking. Yep.
Do you polish the silver from time to time, or is it?
No. I probably.
There's another brush for that. He has a different brush.
Yeah.
A brush polishing brush.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of the Oral-B, and this is a medium, and I've been using it for years. But actually, I do actually use this. It is a brush technically, and I do use it for making art. I splatter ink with it, so
very true.
I don't know if it's my favorite, but it's certainly the first that came to hand. So I was at the dentist this week, so that may have been what brought it to mind. Yeah.
I like how someone in the chat said, I like whatever brush helps me do my best work. So I think that's probably where I am too. Yeah. The brush
that you have at hand. All right, good. So then we have a fourth member of our panel who isn't physically present with us, and that's Sam Atkins. Sam Atkins is well, she's going to introduce herself in a minute, but she is our fourth expert. Well, our fourth panelist, and David and I recorded an interview with her, and Jonathan, can you run that tasty Sam Atkins footage? And we're going to spend about 6 or 7 minutes watching this first of 3 mini chats with Sam Atkins about brush making at Winsor Newton. So we have Sam Atkins here, who is in England, so she is not able to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to answer questions about brushes. And so I got up at 5 in the morning to ask her questions about brushes, and that's what we're going to be doing today. Sam, I'm interested to know a bit about you. What is your job?
I work at the facility in Lowestoft, England, and my main task or role is to develop artist brushes for the fine art industry. I have a background of being in the business for almost 26 years now. Um, and interestingly, my mum used to be a brush maker many years ago, and I came along and joined the company, and I've been in multiple roles to the one I'm doing today.
So this is a multi-generational thing. That's so interesting.
Yes.
How do you make a good brush, like a Series 7? What's involved in actually the manufacturing it? Are there factories with thousands of brushes popping out every minute, or I have
Oh
no
my gosh.
concept of how it
Yes.
works.
Yes. Yes. It's a painstaking process. It's easier to show you. There we go.
Yeah.
So this is sable hair that's been already tied into shape. It's gone through multiple processes at this stage. And once we're happy with this shape, I'm essentially twisting that inside the ferrule, and I want to pull it through the hair through to the ferrule. What I would do, I would make this to a specification. So if this would have a specific hair length out of its ferrule, and I would pull that to length. And then it would go on to a process of being set with glue inside to hold it inside, ready for the next manufacture process.
So the length of the brush is a function of how far you stick it out. You're not trimming it. You're not shaping it, right? You want the
Oh,
natural
no,
tips. You want
no,
the natural tips of the hair.
you must never, ever, ever, ever trim the tips of sable hair, because it's what help forms the point, and really it leads to its main purpose of working as a watercolor brush, where you need to make sure you retain that fine point. So every hair, sable hair, has a profile like this. So it is a bit difficult to explain, but if I take my Series 7 brush I have here, we have a point, we have a belly here. This, from this end to here, is the length out. You would have this scenario going on inside, and this would be glued inside the ferrule. So then we're at the point of where we have made a brush head. Once we're happy with that, it can then go on to the next stage of having a ferrule added to a handle. This is how a handle starts off. This is basically a block of wood. In this case, this is birch wood, okay? And that's where it starts life, and then it then gets shaped down into a tube of wood, okay? So then we go on to a process of where we shape that to our unique shape. Then eventually gets dipped in base coat, and then whatever handle finish you end up with, you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 processes that happens just to arrive at a handle colour finish. I have a ferrule here and a handle there. It would go on, assuming that it fits well, and then it would be crimped into place. So when I say crimp, this is a crimp section. So it's crimped onto the handle.
So Sam, I'm going to toss a leading question to you. With all of the variables that are required, all the skills that are required to be able to make a really great brush, how long does it take for one of your skilled brush makers to develop those skills so that they can actually get to work?
Oh my gosh, it takes such a long, long time. So if you come to site and you train, you would never ever be started off on a Series 7 brush. You would be given some really what we call low end brushes, low quality, to do perhaps for 6 months. And there's multiple progressions to go through. But the reality is, you would never ever, I would say 3 years plus, and you've got to be really, really good to train to do a Series 7 brush. We just have a core set of people that will do our Series 7 ranges. We'll have a core set of people that will do our acrylic brushes. So they specialise in their area. We try to retain the skill as much as possible. And to give you an idea, we have long time served employees, some that have been here for 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20, 25. We even had someone celebrate 45 years last week. It is a highly skilled job, but it's something that people stay in. They just love producing an artisan product.
How long does it take one person to make one Series 7 brush? Like, are they knocking out 20 a day? Does it take them a week? What? I have no sense of that.
I've done a little study, and I'm sure we looked at one size, and it took 40 hours in total, and that was from hair selection, hairdressing, going all the way through the process, almost 40 hours.
That's amazing. 40 hours. That is pretty amazing. 40 hours to make a brush. I presume that it's maybe they're making several at the same time, but even so, it's kind of staggering. So there's, I don't know, I learned so much just in the 7 minutes about seeing how a brush is actually made and all the stuff that goes on with wood and so on. Hey, I just want to say one thing to all of you all in the audience. If you have a chat, if you want to chat and just make some general comment to the whole crew, to everybody in the audience, just make sure that when you do chat that you select panelists and attendees. And if you have a question for us, put it into the Q&A section. There's a little tab at the bottom that says Q&A. Put it there because we're going to go and tackle all the answers or try to answer all the questions that you put in there. But that's specifically where we're looking. So if you have a question, don't put it in the chat, put it in the Q&A. All right, good. Marla, what did you think of what Sam said about brush making?
Oh, it's really, not to brag, but I got to see that in person a couple of times. So it excites me every time because I remember getting to see that done in person at the factory. So it's amazing. And the hustle and bustle, it's quiet. You can tell everyone is working, on their tasks seriously and intently. And there's a lot of craft and artistry going on, and you just feel that energy, and it just takes me right back to seeing them make it. And she's exactly right. I mean, it is insane how they can take, for the Series 7, they'll take the Calency sable and the really, who've been doing this for years. Are you okay?
Yeah.
Okay. They've been doing it for so many years, and they just pick it up and deftly with their hand just form the right, whatever size brush they're making. And if the thing that really blew me away is seeing, they would look at it, and if any hair was turned the incorrect way, they would pick it and turn it the right way. So they could see on that little mink animal that David said in the chat, they would be able to see what hair was in the wrong direction and fix it. So yeah, it's a mind-blowing process. It's, yeah.
Incredible. I had no idea. I assumed that they were just like factories pounding out thousands of brushes. I don't know. I didn't really think it through, but now when you understand that, it's really, what did you think? What did you think of it as an artisanal experience?
Well, again, and I've been fortunate as Marla has mentioned to have been part of that process in the factory in England. And it really is a remarkable process. There's a level of skill, a level of dexterity, and artisanal degree of craftsmanship that is extraordinary. You don't appreciate it until you see it, and then you really don't appreciate it until you try to do it. I've had the privilege of trying to replicate that process, and just I'm hopeless. And I've got a reasonable level of dexterity, but I was just absolutely hopeless. I do want to say, I want to catch something here that a couple of people have asked questions about the hair. Where does the sable come from? Is it a little bit of information about the hair itself? And I realize that some of this is a bit of a challenge given the environment and the concerns around animal welfare, and I'm very sympathetic to that. We're going to talk more about some synthetic options in a little deeper in the program, which I think are going to be good. But I think it's worth calling out what really makes great hair. When I did an Art Geek program for Sketchbook School and the Spark group earlier this week, somebody showed me a brush online that was a sable that was just a mess. And one of the things to keep in mind is just because it's labeled or harvested as sable hair doesn't mean it's great hair. The best quality sable for making a great quality brush, and a little later I'll do a diagram and show you some stuff, but the best quality sable is harvested from animals and from pelts in the dead of winter in a very, very cold climate like Siberia or Mongolia. And they do it in the winter because that's when the hair is the longest, strongest, and most resilient. And you can't just take it from anywhere on the pelt. The best quality hair comes off the top of the tail, because that's the portion of the pelt that has the least amount of wear and tear. So if you're going to make a great quality brush, you take it from that very small available area, and you can do remarkable things of remarkable quality. Again, Marla and I will both demonstrate some things in a little bit. But just because it says it's sable doesn't mean that it's breathtakingly fabulous. It really depends upon the quality of hair, and coming back to what we just saw from Sam, the extraordinary skill of the brush maker. And I'm going to say this at the end of the program: if you're interested in a great brush, don't buy your brushes as a commodity online. Buy them at your local art materials store where you can test them.
Good point. So Gail has a question. Does one person make the whole brush, or do several people make different parts?
One person makes the tuft and puts it into the ferrule.
The brush part.
Yeah. The tuft. Yeah, the tuft is what the head or what the bristles or the hair is called. And one person makes the tuft, and then it may get passed on to somebody else who then puts on the handle. And then there are also people who dress the hair as well separately. Sometimes it's one person who does the whole thing, but sometimes they share their skills across the team.
Right, and that's something I saw too. There's like a machine, like David said, they would take the ferrule and the tuft and then have a little, it's still hand done, but it's a machine that kind of compresses the ferrule onto the handle. And so someone's putting it in and it kind of chonks it onto the handle, chonk, that professional.
So. All right, good. So I just want to give you, as you're putting your questions up here, I'm going to try to answer all of them. But basically what we're going to do is we're going through this process. We have kind of 3 areas that we're going to talk about initially, and then we're going to open it up and talk about all kinds of stuff. But we just are covering right now the making of brushes. Then we're going to talk about synthetic brushes, which is a new thing, and we have a lot to learn about that. And then we're going to talk about how you look after a brush. But there's also a lot of questions that people are asking about what kinds of brushes to use, how do you use certain kinds of brushes, and we're going to talk about that. And David, you're also going to show us how to kind of assess our brushes, how to test them and make sure that we have some really good ones. So Faith asks, what is Series 7? What is that?
Marla, do you want to do that one?
All right, I will, even though I learned this from you, David, but I'll see. My understanding of the name Series 7 is that it was commissioned for Queen Victoria. And when it was presented to her by the brush makers, she absolutely loved it. And am I right, David, that she gave it the name Series 7 because it was her?
That's right.
Favorite brush.
Yeah, that was her favorite size, was size 7. So that then became the name of the brush itself.
But Series 7 is a line of brushes, and you can get a Series 7
12. Double. Yeah. Right. The name is Series 7. Yep. But you can get various sizes in that.
Okay, so I'm just looking at some. All right, Julie has an interesting question. Can a good brush be created from found objects like animal fur or grasses. I found some large, very soft white hair on a trail. Interesting, because we were having some conversation about roadkill, and could you like grab a raccoon you found by the side of the highway and
Could you make a brush? Yes.
put a
Would it
stick on it?
be great quality? No, it might be something that you'd want to film the whole process, gathering the hair, making it, and make it more of a performance piece and not expect too much out of it. But I think those things, those explorations can be really informative, all joking aside. But yeah, I think when you do that, you find that a quality made brush is well worth the money, and your time is better spent elsewhere, than finding raccoons and skinning them. So that's just 2 cents, but paying out of your own hair, yes, I've thought about that too.
Well, I'd like to move on to actually the next section of our conversation with Sam. And again, we will continue to answer all these questions live. But our next section was about synthetic brushes, but also explaining how do the hairs in a brush actually work, which might kind of help us with our roadkill idea, which is like what are we looking for in the hairs? Like what is the qualities they have to have? And synthetics are an interesting thing because we've all experienced synthetic material, right? And double knit polyester pants and things like that. So we've all had this experience of how man-made materials are actually improving. The technology is improving and getting better and better, and that similarly is true in the brush industry. So, Jonathan, why don't we play our next video? It's about 8 minutes long, and Sam is going to explain to us what synthetic brushes are and how regular brushes differ from them, and what the goals and objectives are with making these kinds of brushes. So, let's go whenever you're ready. Let me ask you about synthetic brushes, because obviously that's at least the hairs part of it is a different process. I imagine the rest is pretty similar, but what is a synthetic brush, and tell me about how it's made, what it is, and how it compares with a natural brush, because it seems sort of mystifying to me. I mean, I've certainly had the experience of using a not very good synthetic brush, and I feel like it just feels wrong. It just feels too slippy, and it doesn't snap and flex the way a natural brush is. It also doesn't hold pigment the same way. So can you just tell me a bit about what is it? What is the synthetic in the first place? How is it made? What do you think about when you're making it? And how can I feel about it? Can I have trust in it?
Yeah, I have to go back to a natural brush in the first place to explain this. So when we talk about natural hair, natural soft sable hair, I mentioned it has a profile, like it's got a belly, and then it goes to a point, basically, under magnification.
Each individual hair is shaped kind of in a brush-like way.
Shaped that way, yes. And also under magnification, what you will see for natural hair are what I call little pockets or scales around the entire fibre of one hair. So what that does is when you want to use your brush with watercolour, it picks up the water, the colour, and holds it in those little pockets. Now, when you talk about a synthetic brush, a synthetic fibre starts off life parallel, it's straight. It also does not have all these little pockets. So what you end up doing is processing that synthetic fibre to give a memory of a pocket, or create a pocket, or create a point. So I mentioned that synthetic hair is straight, is parallel, but to get that to go to a point, it has to go through a process. We call this tapering. The longer the taper, the softer the filament. The shorter the taper, the stiffer the filament. But also, synthetic filament comes in multiple diameters. So you can have something as small as an 007 and go up to something like an 025. New technologies, new developments these days allow you to play around with some of that surface. So when we start talking about synthetic brushes, you can get very economical synthetic brushes, but it doesn't mean to say it will do the job well for a watercolor brush. When you're looking for a synthetic watercolor brush for fine art, you want something that has considered things like the softness of the filament, the taper of the filament, the texture of the filament, because all of these added together enhances its functionality to get closer or almost imitate a natural variant. With current technologies as they are, we get closer and closer every day.
Right.
But
So
what I wanted to show you, which might help understand, I was showing you earlier, where am I
yeah,
there?
yeah, we can see it. That's right. That's perfect. Yeah.
So that's natural sable, and actually, if I do, nope. I'm not very good at this. So natural sable, you can see it is splaying out. It's got full of body, and you know that's what we look for. But the other side is synthetic, so you can see it's almost parallel. So what we have to do is be imaginative and try and get something that gets close to filling out similar to this.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you can tell immediately by looking at the two what the difference is and probably what it feels like. But what would you say to people who are going to buy a brush? Would you say, definitely invest in a sable brush? It's, particularly if you're doing watercolor, it's definitely the way to go. Or what would your message be in terms of synthetics versus natural?
If I'm honest, for watercolor, it's down to personal preference. Um, we have the natural option, and in my mind, it holds more water. It lasts much longer, as long as you care for your brushes. But that there are arguments of, well, maybe the synthetic is just as good, and really there's the alternative for the consumer. Not everyone feels comfortable, and it is recognized by the industry, not everyone feels comfortable using natural hair, so the synthetic is designed to be as close as it can be currently, and give that consumer that choice.
So part of
And
it
what I
is,
would say,
I was also going to just make a comment when you showed this the synthetic filament tuft versus the sable, and that the sable splays.
yeah,
I think it's so easy to look at that head that is splaying, and assume that maybe that's why would that be a good brush and give a great point? Well, here I've got here we're gonna hold up brushes here. So I've got I'm going the wrong
there you go,
direction.
there you go.
So I've got a size 12 series 7 here and a size 11. The size 12 I've had for 35 years, and
wow.
it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. And I've just recently broken out the size 11 and realized that actually on my size 12 I've lost a little bit of the point. With 35 years of work, it started to wear down just a little bit, and I'm looking at the point on this size 11, and it is absolutely stunning with a big brush like this. And you talked about the scales that ring the natural filament, the natural hair, and it's that relationship between the hair and the water, the hydrogen bonding. I'm gonna get all chemical. The hydrogen bonding in the water that actually pulls the tuft, pulls the head together, so that you get this remarkable point. And it's gonna be really interesting to see what happens with the development of synthetic filaments that you're
Mm-hmm.
working on over the next generation, to see if you can get to this kind of remarkable quality.
Yeah,
So,
that's the desire.
huh?
That's
What?
the desire going forward.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's amazing. It seems each video ends with me saying that's amazing, but it is amazing. So there you have it. Yeah, by the way, we interviewed Sam in the factory. So if some of the acoustic issues that we had were because she's a brush maker, not a video person, but hopefully you were able to understand everything that she's saying, which is great. So Marla, how do you feel about synthetic brushes?
I think it was interesting to hear what Sam had to say. And I was thinking about that for myself too. Like, what would I recommend? And okay, for watercolor, I do agree. I do like the brand new synthetics that Winsor Newton has for the watercolor. And I was just playing with it when she was talking. And I feel like the synthetics that Winsor has now are quite good for holding water, but I would agree with Sam that the natural hair still holds on more, just because of the scales on the hair follicles, like she was talking about. But really, if you have an issue with, or if you're conscientious about what type of hair you want to use, what is exciting to me is that these synthetics are the best that I have used. I remember when I started this working with Winsor Newton, probably over 20 years ago now, they would talk to us about, yep, we're always trying to come up with new and better synthetics. And now with these, I think that that's actually quite true. So that's what's exciting to me, is that these synthetics are really quite good.
Yeah, I mean, my experience with synthetics, and again, I'd kind of given up on them a while ago, but is they feel weird, and they don't seem, they're hard to load. Like they're not, they don't retain it. But now, but I have to say, I've been using these ones. I'm feeling differently. I'm getting used to it. What do you think, David? What's your feeling about it? Besides your
So for
$1 million sable brush, but yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, tying into that last comment that I made in Sam's video about, it's the water that pulls things together. So I'm now on a water molecule. So my head's an oxygen, and these are two hydrogens. So can I, Danny, you okay there?
Can
I do a demo?
Yes. Yes.
Can I do a demo?
Yes, that would be great. So David's going to do a demo,
Okay.
and I'm going to spotlight you at our expense. So I think you and I are going to disappear, and we're going to give David and his hydrogen molecules the stage.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I think it helps to look back at, or take a global view as to what makes a good brush. And we're talking watercolor brushes. So there's really three attributes that make a great watercolor brush. The first is point. Will it come to a good point? The second is, does it offer good snap and spring? And, it's kind of a Goldilocks thing. A brush which has too little spring is kind of like painting with a wet, slippery piece of pasta. A brush which has too much spring can be like trying to paint with a pogo stick. So it's having the right kind of snap and spring. And then the third is flow control. How much color will it take into the body or the belly of the brush, and then how effectively it releases that color. So we keep talking about Kolinsky sable, and there's really no other. There's no way around it. There really isn't any other hair that demonstrates or provides all these qualities, and with that kind of that kind of fabulousness, if that's a word. So I'm going to draw a picture of what a Kolinsky hair, a single hair, looks like. It by itself, it has a belly, and from that belly, it comes down to a very, very fine point. It also has, as Sam mentioned in the video, it's ringed with a series of scales. And what those scales do is, when you load the brush with color, is these scales then capture that color and they hold it. And when you start to use the brush, the color will come out of those scales through capillary action, and it gets released off the point. The belly is what helps, that belly is what gives the hair its unique amount of spring. And again, a great quality natural hair, a great quality Kolinsky has a fabulous degree of spring that's just kind of right. You lay it on the surface, you pick it back up, it comes right back to shape. Lay it down, it'll come right back to shape. And it's and that's what gives you, I'm going to show you here in just a sec, that's what gives you that remarkable range of a fine point to a broad point back down to a fine point, that subtle and exquisite characteristic that you can get with a good quality brush. Here is, and I want to be really fair and acknowledge the qualities that are now coming to the market with synthetics. So let's go back 40 years ago. Somebody was making leisure suits and bad ties with nylon and polyester and decided, heck, let's make brushes from that. So they would extrude those fibers, and that's what those fibers looked like. The only way that you get a point on them is that you whacked it, you cut them at an angle, and they're absolutely straight. They're also absolutely smooth as glass. So if you make a brush out of this kind of filament, you can maybe get it to load with a little bit of color, but you have almost no control of how it comes off. It tends to dump. You also don't get a good and consistent point that is pulled together because of the hydrogen bonding with the water when you load it with color. But over the last few years, there have been some, I think, remarkable developments with synthetics. And this is true with synthetics across the market. If you're looking for a good synthetic brush, and again, here's where I say, go to your local art material store and try them. There are remarkable differences that you'll be able to tell if you're actually testing them there in the store. So a synthetic filament now can be produced like this. It has a bit of a belly. It can be shaped and extruded as they pull it off of the machine that they're using to extrude these filaments, and it takes a point. You can also manage the spring a little bit more effectively. These old synthetic filament brushes, they were so springy, it was like trying to paint with a pogo stick. But let me show you real quick what this means. So here's a fairly early synthetic filament brush, and this is not a bad brush. I would use this brush. Somebody asked in the question column here about what I would use for inks. This is a brush I would use for inks. Synthetic filament brushes are good for inks. So I've loaded this brush, and let's see, you can see this. Let's see how much color comes off, and it's coming off pretty consistently. I can get a reasonable degree of fine to broad. It's a nice brush. This is a pure synthetic. They've managed some of the flow control by taking filaments of different diameters and creating the tuft with those different diameters, which helps create pockets within the tuft of the brush, so you get better flow control. So that's pretty good. Now here is, so this actually, the one that I just used with, that was a size 10. We're gonna use a really great quality Kolinsky in a size 7. And so even though it has a smaller tuft, let's see what this does. Well, for one thing, holy buckets, look at the point on that thing. And the graduation from the belly all the way down to that point. Now look, you can see the kind of fine point I can get with that, going to a broad line. But let's just keep going here.
And that's a size 12 brush, so that's a pretty big fat brush. But you're able to get.
No, this one is a size 7.
Size 7, but even so, that's not a fine pointed brush. No, I'm not a detail brush really.
Well, no, it's not a detail brush, but that's one of the joys of a really great quality Kolinsky. Is, in fact, this is my go-to brush that I use every day, Danny, because it gives me a wonderful broad stroke, and it can go down to, can you guys see that? It can go down to a hair. Well, hold it, we're not running out of color. Na, 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 na. In the interest of time, folks, I'm actually going to stop here, but I'll tell you, I could keep going almost as much as, at least triple what that synthetic brush delivered. And it's because of the qualities that come with this natural hair and how it holds color and how it releases the color. So that's the demo that I wanted to do. Now, does that mean that the only brush that you should ever use is, if you're working in watercolors, a Kolinsky Sable? There are lots of good brushes, and as Marla has said, I think the developments in synthetic filaments is certainly worth citing and worth celebrating. But if you can afford it, having at least one really great Kolinsky Sable brush it's a revelation. It's extraordinary. Okay, I'm gonna
That's a fantastic
go back
demo.
to.
That's a fantastic
Isn't
demo.
that though?
It is. Oh, sorry. And it's also, to me, what you just showed us is just a great thing to sit down and take all of your brushes and just do an apples to apples comparison. You'll learn so much right there, just doing that, about how each of your brushes, in terms of control and in terms of how much it's holding, right? That's really what that's a measurement of, is how much can liquid is being sucked up into those bristles.
Yeah, how much it holds, but then also, even more important, once you've got it in the belly and the body of the brush, how it comes off. It's the mark of the maker. That, it's how it comes off and the kind of control that you have with a great quality brush, and how that affects a great tool is an enhancement to your creative process. A great quality tool doesn't make you a great painter. What it does, though, is open doors that you can go through.
Yeah, and you don't have to fight. Yeah.
I just made up that metaphor. That was a pretty good metaphor, wasn't it? Yeah, I like that.
So I think you do that 10 times a day, probably, David.
That is an interesting question. I mean, I think, we all have, lots and lots of sort of jars sitting around with like thousands of brushes in them. And, I guess the question is, should we have thousands of brushes, or should it be like, like the French say about, good quality cashmere or something like that? Should we be investing in a small number of brushes? And if we do, on a just rule of thumb, like what should those be? And how should we go about putting together really our most useful kit? What would you say about Marla?
Well, thinking of that, one thing I would say is that you have to consider what media you use. And if you use all sorts of media, I think you'd want to have a bank of brushes to keep for each media. So, I don't use my watercolor brushes for acrylic. I don't use my acrylic for oil, and so on. And there are various reasons for that. If I used acrylic with my watercolor brushes, I'm going to gum up those scales or flags that Sam was talking and David were talking about. And I'm going to have a really hard time cleaning it. And I'm wasting my money if I spend that on a good quality watercolor brush. Likewise, if I use my oil brush, or if I take an acrylic brush and I use it with oil, and then I want to go back to using it in an acrylic, I'm probably going to be sullying up my acrylic color with oil residue. So how many brushes? I think you have to consider what kind of painter you are. Do you like working with lots of media? And say maybe you're just you just prefer watercolor and that's all you anticipate using. Then sure, I think you can start, like David said, maybe invest in a really good quality one like the Series 7 and have that as like the pinnacle. But then also you can fill it in with like the artist watercolor brush that I said was my favorite. This is one, honestly, that I'll take with me more than my Series 7, because I always have a slight fear that I might lose my Series 7. So for travel, this is about the next best thing to the Series 7, and it's sable and it's handmade and all of the great things that the Series 7 is, but it's just not quite as costly, and I feel like I can take this with care and ease more so than my Series 7. And so there can be all sorts of reasons that you might choose to have, how big your bank of brushes would be. So I think that's a big part of it.
What maybe David, you have a thought on this. What would be a good what sizes would be good for just all everyday use? How many sizes would you tell people to have, and what numbers should those be? In other words, regardless of the series or the brand.
Yeah, so I think Marla really captured it well. It really depends upon, I think you want to have an arsenal, if you will, or a quiver with arrows that are best suited to each of the media that you're using. So I'm going to give an answer for a watercolorist who's working with flowing color in a variety of sizes. Marla is much more expert than I am on acrylic, and she could answer that question about acrylic. But with watercolor, 3 brushes.
3.
I take, yeah. And again, I literally have hundreds of brushes strewn around this studio, but there are 3 that I use every day, and I'm painting every day. There are 3 that I use every day. I use a good quality natural hair size 4, a good quality natural hair size. It would vary, either 7, 8, or 9, but probably a 7 or an 8. But either of those are going to be fine. And then a large brush that I can use as a wash brush, and that can be, you know, a brush like this, a Kazan Squirrel. Kazan Squirrel is a great hair for wash brushes. It's really floppy when it gets wet, so it doesn't give you the spring that a Kolinsky hair gives you, but it holds a ton of color, and you can really use this for laying down large washes. But if I have those 3 brushes, and I do use my size 12, I still use this brush. I use my size 12 often rather than a Kazan. But those are the 3 brushes that I use every day, and I may be working 9 by 12, or I've just finished a large watercolor that's 29.5 by 41, and those were the only 3 brushes that I used on that 3.5 by 2.5 foot watercolor painting.
I mean, I tend to work pretty small because I work in a sketchbook, and I have a number 7 series 7, and I just find like a lot of times I'll put out a few brushes, and then I'll realize like all I'm working with is this one brush. Because it comes to such a fine point, you can really get small, but also you can, you know, I don't do huge washes usually, but you know, if you have a good brush, it kind of, again, like a good pair of shoes, it works in lots of different situations, and it's good. So
yeah, I really like what you said, that I think it's a much smarter strategy to invest in a small number of really good quality tools rather than a lot of money in lower quality tools and have a gazillion of them. Yeah, be picky and choosy, and you'll get much more out of it if you use that strategy.
Susie's asking, how do you spell the type of squirrel wash brush that you were describing?
Kazan, Kazan, Kazan.
Right. Yep. Okay. Megan's asking about sumi or quill brushes.
Yeah.
I mean, I use sumi ink with my watercolor brushes, probably disastrous, but yeah. What do you guys think about?
Yeah, so I mean, you know, that's a different technique, and Asian style of, it's fun. I took an Asian watercolor class, or an ink watercolor class, Chinese painting, a couple of years ago, and just fell in love with it for lots of reasons. But typically, those brushes are not made from Kolinsky or sable. They're typically made from either pony or goat. And again, and they don't, that because you're making these broad gestural strokes, and what you want is a hair that's going to hold a lot of color. You don't need much of a point, and pony or goat will hold a ton of color, and you can really get to swinging and lay that color out with those hairs.
Is that your little pony that you're holding there, Marla? What is...
I know. Can't resist. David was talking about a Kazan squirrel, and I had to pick up my plastique squirrel, I guess I should say. This is
that sounds explosive. Yeah.
Plastique. What's a better word? I don't know. But yeah, I've been playing with this quill brush. It is our synthetic squirrel, which that's always fun to think about, little synthetic squirrels running around. But I'm kind of blown away by this one. We were talking about, you know, natural versus synthetic. This kind of freaks me out how much water this synthetic squirrel holds. So yeah, that's why I keep messing with it. It's nice and loaded with water. But I don't know if you guys know where the word quill for this type of brush comes from, but typically you'd have the wood handle, and if you have brushes like this, you'll see that they're wire wrapped. But in a traditional quill, I would assume like David's Kazan, it's a goose quill from the feather. And so it wraps around the hair to the ferrule, and then it's tied with wire. And so, I think that's it's also just to me a beautiful style of brush. So, I get suckered into that too. But anyways, yeah, it holds a lot of water and it works really well. And I actually kind of like that it's not so springy. Something about it, I like how it loads up and I can just doodle with it for days. So it's a good one.
That's great. So why don't we have, we're going to come back and we have still some more questions here we're going to answer for what's been posted. But Jonathan, let's play the final video that we recorded with Sam, in which she's going to talk about how you look after your brushes, which I think is something we all want to know about. How do you make sure that well, she'll explain it. Let's roll that videotape. I love saying that. How should people look after both their sable and their synthetic brushes? You mentioned obviously not just like leaving it face down in water forever, but what else should we be doing with our brushes? Should we be washing them? Is there ways that we should be drying them? Are there ways that we should be storing them that you as a manufacturer kind of recommend?
The foremost is always remove as much colour as you can. So for watercolour, obviously you're using water, so you're rinsing all the colour away anyway. Use warm water and just a normal soap, not detergent or anything, and just wash all the colour out. But what I would say is always make sure you have the colour removed even down to that ferrule edge, because some people don't clean deep enough and that can clog up. So that's really advice for not just a watercolour brush, but for oil, acrylic and so on. You want to ensure that there is no colour left. You run the water and it's all running clear, then I always feel confident that that's as clean as that can be. And what I would do is manipulate the shape, whether it's a round brush or whether it's a flat brush. I would manipulate the shape and then I would just lay it on the surface to dry naturally. I'm going to break this open. I'm going to do a bit of this. I've like messed it up quite a bit. I'm now going to put it in some water. So the first thing I'm going to do is flick the water out, and I can push that into shape. Did you see where that nipped in?
Yeah, it regained its shape. Yeah.
It just helps it keep shape and it dries that way. It's a bit like when you fall asleep and you've got wet hair. If you haven't brushed it the next day, you wake up and it's up in the air. It's just making sure that it's nice and tidy. Leave it on the surface. Let it dry naturally before you put it away in storage.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about when you were describing it. It was like don't go to bed with wet hair, but not a problem I face a lot. But yes, I understand that I have vague memories of it. Here's another question.
What I would add is never, ever, ever leave your brushes sitting in a pot on their hairs. Always, always at the end of your painting day, remove it, because you will damage the hair no matter what media you are using. That water will sit up to here, and therefore there's a little gap here, and the water is starting to be absorbed by the wooden handle. So you get a swelling technique happen where it's absorbing the water. So it's absorbing, then it dries out, absorbing, then it dries out, and therefore it loosens that print.
That makes I've never thought of that before, but it makes sense. It's just a piece of wood, right? It's just a piece of wood. So if water over years is going to affect it, of course, that makes total sense. And that's also true. I mean, everything you just said is as true for synthetics as it is for natural. Yeah.
Yes.
Same thing. Yes. Because I have a number 7 that I've used. It's my main brush. I've used it for a number of years. I mean, many years. I'm looking at it now, and I've damaged it in a number of ways because I didn't talk to you before I was using it. But one of the things is the varnish is definitely cracked and peeled away on the handle. I have other brushes also where, as I said, the handle is separated from the ferrule. What does one do about those sorts of things?
Um, Basically, there's nothing you can do other than say, you know, make sure the next one you buy, you don't leave it sitting in water.
I can't send it to like a furniture refinisher and have them sand it down and maybe I could, but we'll say that for another day of fantasies. What about storing it? Like, is this kind of thing okay? Just sticking it in and having them sit there like that? Is that okay?
Yeah, so I have
Yeah.
a jar of brushes. Some of them have been used, some of them haven't. And what I would say, I mean, everybody is different. But if I've spent a lot of money on a brush and I want to keep it pristine, I would probably put it in a special little box that I have, a bit like a pencil case. We have our Series 7 brushes in these, but you can, you know, store them in there. They stay dry. They don't get
Show us the
exposed.
box again. Show us the box again. Okay, so this
It's
is sort
just,
of the box you bought it with. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So I would use this to put all what I call my special brushes that I want to keep nice, clean, tidy, and not be exposed to any moth.
Something that troubles me about the idea of putting my brush away in a box, because I feel like then I'm not going to be using it, I want the brushes handy, but I imagine if you have lots of them, that is a good plan. What about other media? So if you have something like a watercolor brush, can you use it safely and without worrying with gouache, for instance?
So what I would say is, yes, you can use watercolor brushes for them as long as you look after your brush by removing all the color after you're, you know, using your brush. It should be fine for as long as it can last. But I honestly would look, if I'm doing watercolor, I'd go for a watercolor brush. If I'm doing oil, I'd go for an oil brush. If I'm doing acrylic, I'd go for
What
acrylics.
about ink? Because that's something that I use the sable brush in ink, and now I'm
Yes,
getting
and
nervous about
again, the same applies.
same
Same
apply.
applies.
So even India ink, as long as you've got everything out, as long as you've cleaned it properly, it'll be fine. But obviously, you wouldn't use it with acrylic, because then, yeah. Or am I wrong? Could you use it with it?
Some do use it for acrylic, but what I do believe is the colour clogs up the hairs and the brush don't last as long. So I personally wouldn't use that for acrylic. I would use an acrylic brush that's got synthetic hair
Okay.
because it's easier to clean out the colour.
And so clean my brush with for gouache or watercolor. I just use, and you said don't use detergent. Could I use like dishwashing liquid or something like that? Would that be okay?
Don't use detergent. I'd probably use a soap that's not perfumed, just a natural soap, and just build up a lather in the palm of your hand and then run it under warm water. That's simply all I would do.
Okay. In my mind, you're painting with cold pressed paper. It's really rough, and let's say you're covering a large area and you're sort of scrubbing it. Is that going to damage your point? Are you going to wear out your brush by using it on harsher paper? Is that a thing to worry
So,
about?
so how I see it, I mean, everybody is different, but if I take a glazing brush and say you are using cold pressed paper, typically the technique usually is you dip your brush in water and you cover the entire paper with water before you start using your brush. So it's already been soaked with water to do that. Having said that, if you don't take that approach, yes, you can use it on that surface, but I wouldn't be overzealous with it. I just use it in the normal way. Don't use it for scrubbing because we have alternative brushes that do these big wash areas, And I think it's worth investing in a brush that can do the washing for you for big surfaces.
It's also less work. It's easier, and you'll probably get better effects too. All right.
So there was something I wanted to say to kind of piggyback on what Sam was talking about with cleaning. This is a little cheapy soap saver you can get from pretty much any store. It's silicone, I think, but for acrylic or oil, I like putting this in the palm of my hand and taking my brush and rubbing it against that to clean it rather than just the palm of my hand. That way it keeps my hands cleaner. And if I'm using oil, I'm not incidentally rubbing solvent and thereby any pigments into my skin. So I keep this handy. And then you mentioned your favorite brush, Danny, the toothbrush. Sometimes I'll keep that when I'm cleaning as well. And that can help me scrub from ferrule to tip to get any of that clogged pigment that might be at the base of the head of the brush. So those are just some things I'd add to what she was talking about.
And what kind of what can you also?
Yeah, so this is the Artist Oil Synthetic Hog. So now we've got little synthetic hogs running around, and that, which is also fun. But a natural hog bristle brush is made from the spine of the hair of I think it's the Chungking hog. So it starts at the head of the hog and goes down the back, and it's really long, wiry hair filaments. Now, we don't go around skinning hogs. It's a byproduct of other industry where that fur or hair is collected, but it's a very tough, wiry hair that when Sam was talking about scales, the natural hog has flags. So if you could see it at the tips, it's almost like a little split end, not a little peace sign, but a little split end, like our own hair can get when it gets damaged. But you want that natural split end in your oil brushes, because what that will do is when they're made, they actually orient the bristles to nestle together and make a tip. Again, not cutting like Sam was talking about, but those split ends kind of nestle together and give you a tip for holding your oil color. Plus, a genuine hog is going to be a bit more stiff than a sable hair would be, because oil color is a stiffer paint, right? So you need a stiffer filament. And it has that closer to ping pong, not ping pong, what'd you say, pogo stick spring, David, so it's a little springier to hold up to that oil. But this one is synthetic, so it comes from the new synthetic that Winsor Newton found, that from me playing with it with acrylic, it's very, to me, it's very similar to a natural hog. The reason I like it with acrylic better than a natural hog is that since it's synthetic, it doesn't go limp in water like a natural hog would. I used to buy cheap hog bristles for my acrylic paint, and not only would they be really hard to clean because of the split ends, but they would go limp because with acrylics you use water as your solvent, right? So synthetics won't do that. So that's a little bit about it.
So what about I think there's a little confusion, and I kind of share it about soap. So she's saying detergent, which in America we think of as stuff you do laundry with.
Yeah.
But I usually use just dishwashing liquid because I go to the kitchen sink and I wash my brushes there. Am I doing something wrong with that? Should I be using something else? What do you think, David?
Yeah, I would. Danny, you're still a good person. It's okay. But
sure about that, but yes, go ahead.
I have every confidence. Anything that's a detergent is specifically formulated to remove oil, and that's what a soap does. The soap, the chemistry of a soap is you've got a molecule which on one side has an affinity for water, and on the other side it has an affinity for oil. So it's like a molecular marriage counselor. It pulls those two together. So a strong detergent will strip oils, whatever there may still be in those natural hairs. And that's not a good thing. You really want to allow those hairs to maintain those natural oils in any way that you possibly can, or replenish them. So a good shampoo, a good mild shampoo or a mild soap is going to be much better than a detergent like Dawn or something else, which is designed to just strip the oil out of the hair, and then you're going to end up drying your hair. And somebody in the question section earlier asked about a brush that they'd had where a nice quality brush where the hairs were really going like this, they'd really splayed. That's often a result of cleaning with a detergent that strips all those natural oils out. So a gentle shampoo or a gentle soap.
Interesting. So, I mean, as you were speaking, I thought, well, it's hair. You wouldn't wash your hair with dishwashing soap.
Mhm.
You know, you'd wash it with shampoo. Is that a viable option?
Yeah. A gentle shampoo is, again, it's formulated to keep or to get a good balance of those natural oils in your hair, so your hair, your scalp stays healthy. You're looking for the same kind of thing with a good quality brush.
All right. So just to give you a time check, we have about 15 minutes left. And there's definitely a lot of questions that are great that are coming up. I do want to take 1 second just because I promised you that we would be giving away some brushes, and I want to do a quick quiz. So I'm going to spend 3 minutes doing that, and then we're going to come back and we're going to try and tackle as many questions as possible. But I just wanted to get this done in the time allotted. So, Jonathan, if you could just give me the thing, good. All right, I'm just going to remove. I'll do it myself. All right, so here we go. So what I want you to do is I'm going to ask you 6 questions. And write down your answers. Do not share them in the chat. No cheating. And then I want you to send them to brushes@sketchbookschool.com. And we're going to take the first 25 people who submitted their answers. Well, not the first 25. We're going to randomly pick 25 people who have answered all the questions right. And we're going to send you some really great brushes. All right. So here we go. Ready? Question 1. Why do brush hairs need scales or pockets? Or people have been giving them lots of different names, but what is the reason for that? Why do brush hairs need scales? Question 2. How long has David owned his number 12 brush? Brought it up several times now. So if you get nothing else right, I'm sure you'll get this one right. How many processes does it take to make a brush handle? Sam showed us how. You take a block of ash and make a brush handle. She talked about how many processes it takes to make that into a handle. How long does it take to make a Series 7 brush? And number 5, can you safely use a watercolor brush with India ink? And finally, what's the most important thing to do when cleaning a brush? So you might want to do a screen grab of these things. I'll leave it up for another minute or two. But let me bring you guys back up. Oh, I see. David, Marla, you guys ready to go back to answering questions?
Sure.
You bet. Yeah,
right.
let's rapid fire.
All right, here we go. And good. Okay, so I'll leave those questions up in the meantime. All right, Corinne asks, do you have any suggestions for storing brushes to avoid moth damage without having to use moth balls?
I hate mothballs. Yeah. Well, like Sam said, I think one reason when you buy a Series 7, they give you that box to put it in there. But one thing I've heard artists do is they'll take like a large plastic box like Tupperware or whatnot, maybe for spaghetti noodles, and you can get some of that craft foam that when you put the end of the brush into the craft foam, it will stand upright. Once it's completely dry, you obviously want to make sure it's completely dry before you put it in there. And then that way you can put the lid on it, and that will keep moths from attacking your filaments.
Good point. Yeah, David, do you have any tips? What do you do with your brushes?
Yeah, I just, I use my bamboo brush wrap. And once my brushes are dry, I just always keep them wrapped, and then I usually put them in a box. I usually keep them I've got a box there in my studio where I roll up and then put my brush wrap in there so that they're well protected.
And don't leave them lying around. Use them. Make a lot of paintings.
Heck yeah.
Where the moths won't get at them.
Right.
Absolutely.
Couldn't tell. Ask what's Kolinsky. Kolinsky is a type of sable. It's just a breed basically of sable.
No.
So we'll move on with that. Marianne asked, what is the name of the Winsor Newton synthetic brush? I mean, I have a bunch of them here, and it is called synthetic sable, professional watercolor.
Yep, synthetic squirrel or synthetic hog or synthetic sable. That's right. So yeah, the watercolor has a gray, the synthetic watercolor has a gray tone. The artist watercolor, which is the it's natural sable, is navy. And then the series 7 is black. So if you're at the store and curious about that, or at, when you're looking, just know that. But yeah, they said it just says professional hog or whatever the professional and then synthetic on it.
Retta asked a question that's related to what I was asking about, if you're using paper that is rough and you're scrubbing on it. She says, I read that using a dry watercolor block is hard on your brush versus pre-wetting your pans first. I'm not sure if she's talking about wetting. She says dry watercolor block. Is she talking about a block of paper possibly versus pre-wetting your pans first, which is something different? So obviously you can wet your paper, but does any of that have to do anything to do with protecting your brush?
No, not really.
All right,
brushes do wear out. Yeah, brushes do wear out if you use them and use them and use them. And again, this brush that I've treasured for the last however many years, I'm not going to give away the answer since people may still be working on that quiz, but this brush that I've treasured for all these years, it is losing some of its point because I've used it so much. But
that's not because your paper was dry or rough or anything like that, probably, right?
No.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, if you think about it, even on a living animal, brush hairs don't last that long, right? So we're kind of putting these hairs into a natural situation in the first place.
Yeah.
What about leaving your brush upright, Francis? Is it bad to leave a wet brush upright to dry? Is it better to lay it flat until it's dried? What do you think about that, Marla?
Yeah, it is not the optimal thing to leave it upright to dry, because like Sam was talking about, when you're brushing, and then David was talking about the capillary action of water, the water gets sucked up through the filaments and goes to the ferrule. And when you clean it, you've got a lot more water in there. And if you leave it upright, that water is going to have a much harder time evaporating out of the ferrule. And then what happens is it soaks to the handle swells because most are wood. Then when it shrinks back, once the water evacuates, now you've got that loose ferrule situation you were talking about, Danny.
I see.
So that's why I think Sam was talking about dry them horizontally. This may sound crazy, but when I use a big, like a giant brush, maybe like a varnishing brush or something like that, I have been known to hang them by a clothespin upside down just to make sure the water has a chance to drain. And then I'll lay them flat. And then once you're sure they're completely dry, you can just put them in a vase or whatnot, for storage. But yeah.
I don't know if I'm imagining it, but I feel like I've seen sort of like spiral things.
For cleaning solvent?
Yeah, maybe I've seen them. I guess oil painters use them, that they have
the glass jar with the spiral at the bottom?
No, spiral like on top that you stick your brush into.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I don't know if that's just to separate it. Maybe I suppose you could use that to separate if you hang it upside down while drying. I think you could use that.
Put toast in it too.
Yeah.
All right. So Vicky says, how do you decide about getting a short handled versus a long or regular handled brush? David, you want to take that live?
Yeah. So, it totally depends upon how it feels and the balance, how the balance comes into play. How does it feel for you? Marla's been holding up some of the brushes that have a little broad. Yeah. See how they've gotten broad at the tail. That allows somebody to work. See how Marla's pulled her hand back. To be able to work with it at the end. That gives you a little bit more versatility. It just totally depends upon how the handle feels for you. I'm not sure what else to say.
Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, yeah, I agree. It's preference, but then it's also, if you're like, even though I mainly work with acrylic, I still work at a table. And so sometimes the long handle might poke me in the eye, right? So I like to use acrylic brushes that have short handles, even though the tradition is to have long for acrylic and oil. But hey, Sam may not want to hear this, but if you don't like how long your handle is, you can always cut it and sand it and have whatever size you want that's comfortable for you. So,
and then you can trim the end of the.
No, don't do that. But yeah, or don't tell Sam.
So you can, and you could wear safety goggles so you don't poke your eyes out.
Or Or you can cut them in half
That's
and
right.
then use them as a
And
headdress.
then brush on the side.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
More performance ideas. Awesome.
Obviously, an indication that we're coming to the end of the program. Susie asks, can someone comment on synthetic blend brushes? Blend brushes, are these a mix of process and shaped synthetic brushes, fiber and natural hair? What are they exactly?
Well, they're just what's said. It's a blend. And I think, and David will probably know more than me on this, but I think the idea of a blended is to take advantage of both attributes. The synthetic filaments help the brush maybe last a little longer, and then the natural hair helps give more flow control and water retention.
So they're like jeans with spandex in them or something.
Yeah, yeah, it looks like jeans. Feels like yoga pants. Yeah.
They make your brushes that make your butt look good. Right.
Yeah, I have no idea what either of you are talking about. So, yeah. Here's Winsor Newton Scepter Gold is a sable synthetic, and Marla said it absolutely correctly. You get some of the best of both worlds.
Right. Ginger asks. She says, "I want to love my dagger, but I need to know how to correctly use it."
Not you, David.
She's talking about a brush.
Okay, great. Thanks, Marla. So a dagger brush is hard to do this.
It has
really
very long
fast.
bristles, right? Long bristles that come to a.
No.
No.
I'm gonna change to my document camera. So can you see this?
Yeah.
So here's the ferrule. A dagger brush does like this. So it's wide here at the base, and then it comes to a very fine point here. They were used years ago. They were used all the time in the sign painting industry, and used for very, very fine detail with sign painting. And there are not a lot of them made anymore, but you can still find some, and you can find some used for makeup in the makeup industry as well. Just take care of them the same way you take care of any other brush. Don't treat them like it's a brush that you can use. I wouldn't use them as a flat where you're going to lay down a wide stroke of color. Use them for fine detail and to get a fine detailed stroke.
I mean, I think of them as not calligraphy brushes, but lettering brushes, because you can make really long, thick, consistent lines, I guess.
Yeah. That's exactly right.
I think I've seen some artists who do a lot of roses or other floral work. They'll use the tip and the width to kind of flesh out the petal. I don't have a dagger to show it, but yeah, I've seen that before too.
Yeah, that's right. There are people who spend a lot of time trying to perfect that stroke to get that exact shape for a flower petal or foliage. Yep, you're right.
Hey, a couple of you have been posting your answers, and some have been posting them in the Q&A section. No, you have to email them in. And if you post them the answers, everybody will see them. And then, so email them to brushes@sketchbookschool.com. And if I see them again, I'll just delete them so that nobody else gets your answers. So Arlene asked, do you have recommendations for small size brushes that keep their shape and make fine lines, assuming my hand is steady enough to make fine lines? So,
yes. Yeah. I mean, series 7, I think it goes down to at least 00, if not 000. And there's also detail series 7. I just don't have those handy. But what I do have to show, especially if you want to make thin, long lines, is our synthetic sable rigger. Whenever you see rigger as the name of the brush, RIGGER, that shape is perfect for making long, thin lines. And, I'm glad you asked that, because the rigger has changed my watercolor practice, because I was always kind of thinking, this is, not for me. I don't paint ships or riggers or whatever it's from, art detailing. I don't do that. But I found this shape brush to be really handy for little fine lines and detail. And you mentioned, steadiness with hand. For whatever reason, I am steadier with a rigger than I am with like a pointed round or a round brush. So
interesting, because it's long. Maybe it has more sort of shock absorbing in it or something.
Yeah, I think so. And I think as you go, since the filaments or the ferrule is quite narrow, and then the hairs, don't have as wide of a belly, when you press it on the surface, I guess it just follows that line. I don't know. That's just what I've seen. So
Audrey asked a question. If you could only have one brush, what would you recommend? And the answer can't be buying more brushes.
That is
And it can't be by a, it can't be by a $400 number 12.
No. For me, it's not a number 12. It would be a really good quality Kolinsky in a size 7 or 8.
7 or 8, yeah.
That will do everything.
Right. That's basically what I use most of the time too. So yeah, that's what I would recommend.
Yep.
Yeah. For acrylic, I would say, again, to me, it really depends on scale. So if you're someone starting out and maybe working a little smaller, gosh, I don't know. This is the Artist Acrylic, Winsor Newton Artist Acrylic. It's a softer synthetic. So like the Artist Oil is a firmer synthetic. I like the softer synthetic in our Artist Acrylic, and whatever size is appropriate for your acrylic work. I keep picking up filberts. I don't know how much you guys know about shape heads. Like we talked about dagger and rigger, but filberts are my favorite. I like how you can do wide strokes, and then you can also put it on its edge to get thinner strokes. So
that's for acrylic and oil. That's not really a watercolor style.
No, this is acrylic or oil. Yeah. I mean, you could use it with watercolor, but you won't get the flow control that you'd want. So yeah.
Julianne asks, is rigger the same as liner?
I would say yes. What would you say, David?
Well, they're very closely related, but a rigger is called a rigger because it was developed for painting the rigging on ships. In ship painting. Yeah. Need to be careful with how you say that. That can go badly. Yeah. But a rigger, I think a rigger is generally longer. A liner tends to be very similar, but a little bit shorter, and comes to a little finer point, I think.
Hey, here are two questions I'm going to merge into one because and this will have to be the last question because we're running out of time. Kunal and Ginger asked related questions. If a few strands deviate out from the whole array of brush bristles, can we fix it, or does the brush become useless? Ginger's version of that question is, how can I keep the shorter bristles on my dagger brush from separating away from the long ones? Isn't it the idea that it should give you a nice narrow line with lots of paint? I use acrylics. So on the one hand, suddenly, boom, they're sticking out, and the other, how do you keep them all together into a nice fine line?
Yes, David, do you want to go, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So there's a couple that can happen for a couple of reasons. If it's because the hair itself or the filament is actually broken, it's going to be tough to get it to come back into shape. If it has if there is color or gunk that's inside the ferrule and that's causing everything to splay, there's a couple of things that you can try to do. If it's acrylic, kiss it goodbye. Well, yeah, pretty much. Acrylic is just bomb proof. But if there's stuff in there that you can rinse out and wash your brush really, really well using the technique that we talked about for washing, get it to come to a point. Oftentimes, once it's wet and it's clean, you can get it to come to a point, and then you can dip it in a little bit of gum arabic. Gum arabic is the medium that's used in watercolor, and it's highly water soluble, and it's not going to damage the brush. You can dip it in a little bit of gum arabic, hang it by its toes, so it's hanging downward, and then let it dry for a while, and hopefully that gum arabic will pull everything back into shape and get it to stay in shape. Let it sit for a few days, rinse it out. If it's come back into shape, you're golden. If not, then you probably just need to take a really sharp knife and trim those wayward hairs back as close to the ferrule as you can.
Yipes.
Sounds good. One thing I'll add to that. One thing that, while David's right, you may have to face having to throw away the brush. There's one thing you can try before that if it's gunked up acrylic, and it's the Winsor Newton brush cleaner and restorer. I'll do demos at different schools, and I gifted an instructor a small bottle of this. And she, when I came back a second time, she showed me like 25 brushes that she'd collected from students. They'd abandoned their poor wayward brushes that were clogged with acrylic. She soaked them, and it was able to clear out
that's great.
Acrylic. So yeah, that's one thing to consider if you feel like your brush is just too gunked to go.
All right. Well, Julianne, I'm sorry if that is bad news for you, but give it a try. So, as I said, we are going to give away the some brushes once you send in your answers. Unfortunately, it's only for North America. That's because this is a gift from Winsor Newton, North America. Please send in your answers to brushes@sketchbookschool.com.
Hey,
As you know-
and Danny,
Yeah.
Danny, sorry to be rude and jump
No,
in, but I think
jump
we
in,
should
please do.
probably remember to mention that this is for North America only. Did you say that? I missed it.
Yes, that's just what I said.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
That was doubly
Okay,
rude, in
jeez.
fact.
Duh.
Back on, right?
Yeah, really.
And we are recording this, guys. We're recording it, and you can have access to the recording. We would like to give it to you. We will be emailing the recording early next week. So stand by. It'll take us a day or two to pull this all together and to share it with you. But we will email it out to you. We have your email addresses, and we hope that you have had a good time and that you've learned a lot. Thanks so much to David and to Marla for all of your expertise, and to Sam, of course, and to Winsor Newton for pulling this, for helping to support this endeavor and making it free for everybody. And also, you still have a little bit of time if you want to learn more from David Pyle, because his workshop is this weekend. And it is going to be amazing. It's plein air watercolor, and you can find out more details about it at the sketchbookschool.com website. 2 days with David, learning everything there is to learn about watercoloring, and probably some great jokes too, right, David?
Always. Although, well, great is relative, particularly if you ask my kids.
Some familiar jokes.
Don't ever go to your kids for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yes, there'll be jokes, there'll be all kinds of things, and it will be a lot of fun. We'll be spending the whole weekend together painting. What could be better than that? Grinding our way through brushes, and I'm sure David will be bringing his golden brush. Marla, thanks so much. It was so nice to learn so much about all kinds of painting from you, and I hope that we can do this again and talk about something else, another subject. We do these Q&Arts. Yeah, we do webinars like this. We try to do them every month, and we have a couple planned for later this year. So stay tuned. We'll email you about them as well, and bring on other experts. There's various things that JJ is putting into the thing here. Our newsletter, which we'll be sending out every month. And of course, I write an inspirational email every week. And I have to write one for tomorrow. I send that every Friday, so you can sign up for that at dannysessays.com. All right, anything else? Pencils, yes, or paper. We're not sure. Either way, you're right. We might be about pencils, might be about paper. We don't know yet, David, right?
Right. We'll come up with something great.
Yes, pencils. I mean, look at how many questions people had about brushes, and we didn't even answer all of them.
Yeah.
We did a good job, though. I think we managed to crank through a lot of them. So, all right, guys, thanks so much, and we'll see you next month, or hopefully this weekend.
All right. Thank you.
Indeed. Have fun. Thank you so much. Great fun.
Bye-bye.